In the marble halls of Renaissance Florence, where power shifted like shadows at dusk, Niccolò Machiavelli observed a fundamental truth that would echo. This was not cruelty, this was cold focus in its purest form. The weak man would have met rebellion with counter-rebellion, emotion with emotion, chaos with chaos. Borgia met it with ice-cold calculation and emerged stronger than before. The architecture of cold focus begins with understanding that the world operates according to invisible laws, much like the movements of celestial bodies. These laws care nothing for human sentiment or moral preference. They simply are. The focused mind aligns itself with these realities rather than fighting against them, much as a skilled sailor reads the wind rather than cursing it. In the modern arena, this principle manifests in countless ways. The entrepreneur who watches their first venture collapse does not mourn or make excuses. Instead, they dissect the failure with surgical precision, extracting every lesson like a physician examining tissue under a microscope. They understand that emotional attachment to past mistakes is the luxury of the weak, while the strong use failure as raw material for future success. The mind trained in cold focus operates with what ancient strategists called detached engagement. Every situation becomes a chess problem to be solved rather than a personal affront to be suffered. When a competitor launches an aggressive campaign, the focused mind does not respond with anger or fear. Instead, it asks, what does this reveal about their strategy? What weaknesses does this expose? How can this apparent threat be transformed into an opportunity? This transformation of perspective requires rigorous mental discipline. The untrained mind is like a wild horse, bolting at every shadow, exhausting itself in meaningless gallops across familiar terrain. The disciplined mind is like a thoroughbred, every movement deliberate, every stride calculated to achieve maximum effect with minimum waste. The practice begins with observation without judgment. In any situation, the weak mind immediately labels, good or bad, fair or unfair, threatening or beneficial. These labels cloud perception and limit options. The focused mind simply observes, what is actually happening? What forces are at work? What patterns can be discerned? This neutral observation creates space for strategic thinking to emerge. A technology executive facing a hostile takeover bid exemplifies this principle. The emotional response might include indignation at the predatory nature of the bid, fear of losing control, or anger at the perceived unfairness. But cold focus asks different questions. Why now? What do they see that others might be missing? How can this pressure be redirected to strengthen the company's position? Often, the very forces that seem designed to destroy can be transformed into engines of unprecedented growth. The second element of cold focus involves temporal perspective, the ability to see beyond the immediate moment to the larger patterns unfolding over time. Weak minds operate in a perpetual present, reacting to each stimulus as if it were the only reality. Strong minds function like master chess players, seeing not just the current position but the potential positions that could emerge from various lines of play. This temporal perspective requires what Machiavelli called prudent patience, the recognition that timing is often more crucial than technique. A political candidate who forces an announcement before the ground is prepared may find themselves crushed by forces they could have easily managed with proper timing. The focused mind waits, watches, and strikes only when conditions align for maximum effect. The discipline of cold focus also demands emotional regulation that borders on the supernatural. This does not mean becoming emotionally numb. Emotions provide valuable information about situations and people. Rather, it means learning to process emotions as data rather than directives. Fear signals potential threats to be analyzed. Anger reveals violated expectations that may need adjustment. Excitement might indicate overconfidence that requires tempering. A masterful example emerges from the world of high-stakes negotiation. When facing an aggressive counterpart who uses intimidation and emotional manipulation, the untrained negotiator either responds with matching aggression or retreats in fear. Both responses play into the aggressor's hands. The focused negotiator observes the performance with clinical interest, noting what the aggression reveals about the other party's weaknesses, pressures, and underlying position. They respond not to the emotion but to the strategic reality beneath it, often turning apparent strength into exploitable weakness. This emotional regulation extends to the relationship with success and failure. Both are treated as temporary conditions to be analyzed and leveraged rather than permanent states to be celebrated or mourned. Success provides data about what worked under specific conditions, but the focused mind knows that conditions change and past success guarantees nothing. Failure provides equally valuable data about what doesn't work, eliminating unproductive approaches and clarifying the path forward. The cultivation of cold focus requires systematic practice in what cognitive scientists now call metacognition, thinking about thinking. The focused individual regularly examines their own mental processes with the same objectivity they apply to external situations. They notice when emotions begin to cloud judgment, when fatigue compromises decision-making, or when ego interferes with accurate assessment. This self-awareness becomes a powerful tool for maintaining peak performance under pressure. Physical discipline plays a crucial role in developing mental focus. The body and mind are not separate entities but aspects of a single system. Physical practices that require sustained attention, whether martial arts, endurance sports, or precise crafts, train the mental muscles needed for strategic thinking. The surgeon who can maintain steady hands during a 12-hour operation has developed the same neural pathways that enable the executive to maintain clear judgment during months of corporate crisis. The environment one creates also influences the quality of focus. Weak minds surround themselves with comfort and distraction, seeking to avoid the discomfort of deep thinking. Strong minds create environments that support sustained concentration, minimizing distractions, optimizing physical conditions, and establishing routines that signal the mind to enter focused states. The legendary investor Warren Buffett works from a modest office with few distractions, reading and thinking for hours without interruption. This is not accident but design. Information management becomes critical in developing cold focus. The modern world presents an overwhelming torrent of data, opinions, and stimuli. The unfocused mind attempts to process everything, becoming scattered and reactive. The focused mind operates like a sophisticated filter, selectively attending to information that serves strategic purposes while ignoring the rest. This selectivity is not ignorance but efficiency, the recognition that attention is a limited resource that must be deployed with precision. Social dynamics present particular challenges to maintaining focus. Humans are social creatures, influenced by the emotions, opinions, and expectations of others. The weak mind seeks approval and avoids conflict, allowing social pressure to override strategic thinking. The focused mind operates from internal rather than external reference points, making decisions based on strategic merit rather than social comfort. This often requires the courage to appear cold or calculating to those who mistake emotional display for authenticity. The development of cold focus ultimately transforms the practitioner's relationship with power itself. Instead of seeking power for its own sake or for the validation it provides, the focused individual views power as a tool for achieving specific objectives. They accumulate power systematically, deploy it precisely, and maintain it through competence rather than force or charm. This instrumental approach to power makes them more effective in acquiring it and more dangerous to those who wield it carelessly. As this mental architecture solidifies, practitioners often discover that external circumstances matter less than internal preparation. Challenges that would overwhelm others become manageable puzzles. Opportunities that others miss become obvious. Competitors who rely on conventional thinking become predictable. The focused mind creates its own advantages through superior preparation, clearer thinking, and more precise execution. The transformation is rarely immediate or complete. Like any skill, cold focus develops through consistent practice over extended periods. Setbacks and lapses are normal parts of the process. The key lies in treating these temporary failures as data rather than defeats, adjusting the approach and continuing the systematic development of mental discipline. Those who master this first aspect of Machiavellian strategy discover that focus is not just a mental state but a way of being in the world. It influences everything from daily decisions to life-defining choices. It transforms relationships, clarifies priorities, and creates a foundation for the kind of sustained excellence that distinguishes true winners from temporary achievers. Yet cold focus alone, while formidable, represents only the first element of the complete strategic framework. The mind that can think with crystalline clarity must also learn to act with devastating precision. This is where the second principle emerges: the art of silent action, where power moves through the world like water through stone, reshaping reality without announcing its presence. Part 2, the mastery of silent action. The palace corridors whispered with rumors, but Giuliano della Rovere moved through them like a ghost, his footsteps silent on marble floors worn smooth by centuries of intrigue. Those who underestimated him saw only an aging cardinal, but, beneath the ecclesiastical robes operated a mind that would eventually claim the papal throne through methods so subtle that his enemies destroyed themselves while believing they were winning. This was the essence of silent action, power that achieves its ends through invisibility rather than display, through indirect influence rather than direct confrontation. Where cold focus provides the mental architecture for strategic thinking, silent action represents its physical manifestation in the world. It is the art of achieving maximum impact through minimum visibility, of reshaping reality while leaving others unaware of the forces at work. The weak display their strength and telegraph their intentions, the strong conceal both their capabilities and their objectives until the moment of decisive action. Silent action begins with understanding the difference between motion and movement. Motion is activity without purpose, the frantic thrashing of those who mistake busyness for progress. Movement is purposeful displacement toward specific objectives, often achieved through actions that appear unrelated to the ultimate goal. A technology entrepreneur might spend months building relationships with regulatory officials not because they face immediate legal challenges, but because they understand that future expansion will require navigating complex approval processes. By the time competitors recognize the advantage, the relationships are already established and operational. The master of silent action operates through what intelligence professionals call plausible vectors, activities that appear natural and innocent while serving strategic purposes. A venture capitalist attending art gallery openings might seem to be indulging personal interests, but is actually mapping the social networks of wealthy collectors who represent potential investors in future funds. The art appreciation is genuine, but it serves multiple purposes simultaneously. This principle extends beyond individual actions to entire strategic campaigns. The most effective corporate acquisitions often begin not with formal overtures but with casual encounters at industry conferences, followed by informal dinners, collaborative projects, and gradually deepening relationships. By the time acquisition discussions begin formally, the target company's leadership already feels aligned with the acquiring firm's vision. The transaction appears to emerge naturally from mutual interest rather than calculated pursuit. The psychology of silent action leverages fundamental aspects of human nature. People resist what they perceive as external pressure but embrace what they believe to be their own ideas. Direct attempts at persuasion activate psychological defenses, indirect influence bypasses these defenses entirely. A political operative seeking to shift public opinion doesn't argue directly for their position. Instead, they identify respected figures who already lean toward that position and provide them with compelling information that strengthens their existing inclinations. When these figures speak publicly, their advocacy appears spontaneous and authentic rather than orchestrated. Information warfare exemplifies silent action at its most sophisticated. Rather than suppressing unfavorable information, which often amplifies its impact, masters of this art ensure that favorable information reaches the right audiences through trusted channels. They understand that the most credible message is often the one that appears to come from independent sources rather than interested parties. A pharmaceutical company facing safety concerns about a new drug doesn't issue defensive press releases. Instead, they ensure that prominent researchers have access to comprehensive safety data and allow academic medicine to address public concerns through peer-reviewed publications and professional conferences. The timing of silent action requires exceptional patience and discipline. Weak operators act when they feel pressure to act, often exposing themselves unnecessarily or acting before conditions are optimal. Strong operators wait for what ancient Chinese strategists called the moment of inevitability, when all forces align to make success not just possible but virtually certain. A private equity firm might track a target company for years, watching for the precise combination of market conditions, management changes, and financial pressures that create an optimal acquisition opportunity. Misdirection forms a crucial component of silent action. While pursuing one objective, the skilled operator appears focused on something entirely different. This serves two purposes: it prevents competitors from understanding the true strategy until too late, and it positions the operator advantageously when the real objective becomes apparent. A retail executive might publicly emphasize expansion in domestic markets while quietly building relationships with international partners, manufacturing capabilities, and regulatory expertise needed for global expansion. When international opportunities emerge, they are uniquely positioned to act while competitors are still developing their strategies. The cultivation of multiple identities allows for more sophisticated silent action. This does not mean deception or dishonesty, but rather the recognition that different situations require emphasizing different aspects of one's capabilities and interests. A successful entrepreneur might be known in technology circles as an innovative product developer, in financial circles as a shrewd dealmaker, and, in political circles as a thoughtful policy advocate. Each identity is authentic but emphasizes different competencies, allowing for more nuanced positioning across various contexts. Network theory provides the scientific foundation for silent action. Complex systems, whether markets, organizations, or political structures, exhibit emergent properties that can be influenced through strategic interventions at key nodes. Rather than attempting to change entire systems directly, silent operators identify and influence the critical connection points that amplify their impact throughout the network. A young professional seeking to advance their career might focus not on impressing their immediate supervisor but on building relationships with individuals who serve on multiple boards, committees, and advisory groups. These network hubs provide access to opportunities that would be invisible from within a single organizational structure. The principle of cumulative advantage explains why silent action often produces exponential rather than linear results. Small, apparently insignificant actions compound over time to create massive competitive advantages. The investor who systematically builds relationships with industry experts gains access to information and opportunities that gradually separate them from competitors who rely solely on public sources. Each relationship yields insights that inform better decisions, which generate superior returns, which attract additional capital, which enables larger and more lucrative investments. The advantage grows continuously without any single action appearing decisive. Silent action also involves the strategic use of intermediaries. Direct action often creates resistance and reveals intentions. Action through intermediaries obscures both the source and the ultimate objective. A company seeking to acquire a competitor might work through industry analysts to highlight the target's vulnerabilities, through mutual customers to express concerns about the target's service quality, and through investors to question the target's growth strategy. None of these actions directly involves the acquiring company, but all contribute to softening the target for eventual acquisition. The mastery of timing in silent action extends beyond knowing when to act to knowing when to appear inactive. Periods of apparent dormancy often provide opportunities for preparation, information gathering, and relationship building that would be impossible during active phases. A venture capital firm might deliberately reduce their investment activity during market peaks not because they lack capital but because they are positioning for the superior opportunities that emerge during market corrections. Their apparent inactivity is actually intense preparation for future deployment. Emotional intelligence becomes weaponized through silent action. Understanding others' motivations, fears, and aspirations allows for precise influence without apparent manipulation. A negotiator facing a counterpart driven by status concerns doesn't argue about substance but structures the deal to enhance the counterpart's reputation and standing. The counterpart believes they achieved their primary objectives while the negotiator secures the substantive terms they actually sought. The digital age has created new opportunities for silent action through data analytics and algorithmic influence. Masters of these techniques can shape market perceptions, consumer behavior, and even political opinions through carefully orchestrated digital campaigns that appear organic. They understand that influence in the information age often depends more on pattern recognition and strategic content placement than traditional persuasion techniques. Cultural fluency enables more sophisticated silent action across diverse contexts. The operator who understands local customs, communication styles, and decision-making processes can integrate seamlessly into various environments while pursuing consistent objectives. This cultural adaptability prevents the kind of obvious foreign presence that triggers defensive responses and allows for more natural relationship building and influence development. The concept of strategic ambiguity represents one of the most advanced forms of silent action. Rather than concealing their intentions entirely, masters deliberately maintain uncertainty about their true objectives while making it clear that they possess significant capabilities. This ambiguity prevents opponents from developing effective countermeasures while creating space for opportunistic action as circumstances evolve. A technology company might announce significant research investments without specifying which technologies they're pursuing, forcing competitors to spread their defensive efforts across multiple possibilities while the company focuses on their actual priority. Legal and regulatory frameworks often provide perfect cover for silent action. Actions that appear to comply with routine requirements can serve multiple strategic purposes simultaneously. A mining company might file for permits in multiple jurisdictions not because they intend to develop all sites but because the filing process generates valuable geological data while establishing option value in promising regions. Competitors see routine business activity while the company systematically maps future opportunities. The integration of silent action with legitimate business activities creates what intelligence professionals call deep cover strategic initiatives that are indistinguishable from normal operations. A software company might develop open-source tools that genuinely benefit the developer community while also gathering intelligence about industry trends, identifying talented individuals for recruitment, and establishing technical standards that favor their proprietary platforms. As practitioners develop expertise in silent action, they often discover that their greatest successes feel almost effortless to outside observers. Opportunities appear to fall into their lap, relationships develop naturally, and market conditions seem to favor their initiatives. This appearance of luck or natural advantage actually reflects sophisticated preparation and positioning that creates the conditions for apparent spontaneity. The compound effects of consistent silent action often become visible only in retrospect. Years of relationship building, information gathering, and strategic positioning suddenly crystallize into decisive advantages when opportunities emerge. Competitors who relied on reactive strategies find themselves unable to match capabilities that took years to develop. The operator who seemed merely competent is revealed to have been systematically constructing an invisible empire. Yet silent action alone, while formidable, represents only the second element of the complete strategic framework. The mind that thinks with clarity and acts with precision must also undergo a deeper transformation, the deliberate destruction of its own weaknesses to achieve a state of inner invincibility. This is where the third and most profound principle emerges, the creation of an unassailable self through the systematic elimination of everything that makes one vulnerable to external control or destruction. Part 3, The Forge of Inner Destruction in the Depths of Winter. When Florence lay shrouded in mist and the Arno ran cold between its ancient banks, Machiavelli made his most radical observation, one that would distinguish his understanding from all previous philosophies of power. He realized that external enemies could only destroy what was already weak within, that defeat came not from superior opposition but from internal vulnerabilities that external forces merely exploited. The man who could systematically destroy his own weaknesses would become, in essence, indestructible. This principle operates like steel forging, subjecting base metal to extreme conditions until impurities are burned away and only the strongest elements remain. But, unlike physical metallurgy, this process targets the psychological and spiritual elements that make individuals vulnerable to manipulation, defeat, and destruction. The weak man preserves his comforting illusions, his emotional dependencies, and his need for external validation. The strong man ruthlessly eliminates these vulnerabilities until he becomes functionally invulnerable to the weapons typically used against human nature. The process begins with radical self-assessment and unflinching examination of every weakness, dependency, fear, and need that external forces could potentially exploit. This requires a level of honesty that most individuals find unbearable. It means acknowledging not just obvious flaws but the subtle dependencies that feel like strengths. The executive who takes pride in being well-liked must recognize that this need for approval creates leverage points for manipulation. The entrepreneur who derives identity from their company's success must understand that this attachment compromises their ability to make objective decisions about the venture's future. Consider the technology founder whose company faced a hostile takeover. His initial instinct was to rally employees, appeal to customers, and mobilize public opinion, all strategies that depended on others sharing his emotional investment in the company's independence. But these approaches revealed rather than concealed his vulnerabilities. The acquiring company could counter each emotional appeal with superior resources. Instead, he turned his attention inward, asking what made him so desperate to retain control that he would make strategically inferior decisions. Through this self-examination, he discovered that his identity had become fused with his role as founder. Once he recognized this psychological dependency, he could address it systematically. The destruction of weakness requires distinguishing between preferences and needs. Preferences can be adjusted based on circumstances without compromising essential functioning. Needs create dependencies that others can exploit. The strategic mind works systematically to convert needs into preferences wherever possible. The executive who needs recognition can be controlled through its withholding. The executive who prefers recognition but functions effectively without it maintains strategic flexibility. This transformation often involves confronting the comfortable lies that most individuals tell themselves about their motivations and capabilities. The manager who believes they are motivated by altruistic concern for employees might discover through honest self-examination that they are actually driven by a need to be seen as benevolent. This need for a positive self-image can be exploited by opponents who frame conflicts in ways that make tough decisions appear cruel or selfish. By recognizing and eliminating this need for moral validation, the manager can make decisions based purely on strategic merit. Fear represents perhaps the most powerful tool for external manipulation, making its elimination a crucial aspect of inner strengthening. Fear operates through imagination, the mental projection of potential negative outcomes. The strategic mind learns to analyze these projections rationally rather than responding to them emotionally. Most fears dissolve under careful examination, revealing themselves to be either improbable scenarios or manageable challenges rather than existential threats. A political candidate facing potential scandal exemplifies this principle. The typical response involves panic, desperate attempts at damage control, and strategic decisions driven by fear of exposure. But fear-based responses often amplify the very damage they seek to prevent. The candidate who has systematically eliminated fear-based thinking approaches the situation analytically. What are the actual likely consequences? How can the narrative be shaped to minimize real damage? What strategic opportunities might emerge from apparent crisis? This analytical approach often reveals that the feared consequences are less severe than imagined and that proactive management can transform apparent disasters into competitive advantages. The elimination of emotional dependencies requires developing what psychologists call emotional self-regulation, the ability to generate internal states independent of external circumstances. The individual who requires constant positive feedback becomes vulnerable to any opponent who can control or manipulate that feedback. The individual who generates their own sense of confidence and validation remains effective regardless of external responses. This internal state management extends to the relationship with success and failure. Both represent external validation of internal processes, but dependency on either creates vulnerability. The entrepreneur who requires business success to feel valuable becomes desperate when facing setbacks, leading to poor strategic decisions. The entrepreneur who maintains internal stability regardless of external outcomes makes decisions based on strategic merit rather than emotional needs. Social dependencies represent another category of vulnerability requiring systematic elimination. The human need for belonging and acceptance creates numerous leverage points for manipulation. The executive who needs to be popular with subordinates cannot make unpopular but necessary decisions. The politician who needs approval from interest groups cannot take positions that serve broader strategic objectives. The systematic reduction of these social dependencies does not mean becoming antisocial but rather developing the ability to act strategically regardless of social pressure. A masterful example emerges from military history, where commanders who eliminated their need for soldiers' affection often became more effective leaders than those who sought to be liked. The popular commander might hesitate to order dangerous missions that could save the campaign but cost lives. The commander who had eliminated the need for personal popularity could make such decisions based purely on strategic merit, often ultimately saving more lives through decisive action. The destruction of intellectual weaknesses requires confronting cognitive biases and thinking errors that distort judgment. Most individuals preserve comfortable assumptions and familiar thought patterns that feel true but may not correspond to reality. The strategic mind systematically challenges its own beliefs, seeking evidence that contradicts cherished assumptions and actively looking for flaws in preferred theories. This intellectual honesty often reveals that strongly held beliefs about markets, people, or situations are actually wishful thinking rather than accurate assessment. The investor who believes that hard work always leads to financial success might be unprepared for market conditions where effort and outcomes become disconnected. By destroying this comforting assumption, they can develop more accurate models of market behavior and make better strategic decisions. The process of destroying personal attachments extends beyond individual preferences to include relationships, possessions, and situations that create emotional leverage points. This does not mean becoming callous or uncaring but, rather maintaining the ability to act strategically even when personal attachments are threatened. The business owner who cannot imagine selling their company because of emotional attachment to employees or legacy may miss opportunities for growth or exit strategies that would benefit everyone involved. Physical dependencies also require systematic elimination. Comfort with specific environments, routines, or material conditions can become strategic vulnerabilities if opponents can disrupt them. The executive who requires familiar surroundings to function effectively becomes vulnerable to anyone who can force them to operate in unfamiliar contexts. The systematic cultivation of adaptability, physical, mental, and emotional, reduces these dependency-based vulnerabilities. The relationship with information presents particular challenges in the modern context. The individual who depends on specific sources of information becomes vulnerable to anyone who can control or manipulate those sources. The strategic mind cultivates multiple independent information sources and develops the analytical skills to extract signal from noise regardless of source reliability. This information independence prevents others from controlling their decision-making through selective information provision. Reputation management illustrates the complexity of dependency elimination. Reputation represents a valuable strategic asset, but dependency on reputation creates vulnerability to anyone who can threaten it. The solution involves building reputation on substantive achievements rather than perception management while simultaneously developing the psychological resilience to function effectively even if reputation is damaged. This approach often actually strengthens reputation because it is based on real capability rather than image control. The systematic elimination of weaknesses often reveals hidden strengths that were previously obscured by unnecessary dependencies. The entrepreneur who eliminates their need for investor approval often discovers they have better strategic instincts than they realized. The negotiator who stops seeking validation from counterparts often finds they have more leverage than they previously understood. The elimination process is not just destructive but also revelatory. Financial independence represents one of the most powerful forms of weakness elimination. The individual who requires specific levels of income or particular financial arrangements becomes vulnerable to economic pressure. Systematic wealth building, not for luxury but for independence, removes this category of vulnerability entirely. The executive who has achieved financial independence can make career decisions based on strategic merit rather than financial necessity. Time management emerges as another crucial area for dependency reduction. The individual whose effectiveness depends on ideal conditions, perfect timing, or extensive preparation becomes vulnerable to anyone who can disrupt these requirements. The strategic mind develops the ability to perform effectively under suboptimal conditions, with incomplete information, and under time pressure. This adaptability eliminates timing-based vulnerabilities. The cultivation of what ancient Stoics called negative visualization, mentally rehearsing potential losses, strengthens psychological resilience while revealing hidden dependencies. By systematically imagining the loss of possessions, relationships, status, or capabilities, the strategic mind discovers which losses would genuinely impair function versus those that would merely cause discomfort. This practice both reduces attachment to vulnerable assets and improves preparation for actual losses when they occur. The integration of weakness elimination with strength development creates a compound effect. As vulnerabilities are systematically removed, energy previously spent defending weaknesses becomes available for building capabilities. The executive who eliminates their need for constant approval can focus entirely on performance improvement. The entrepreneur who eliminates fear of failure can take calculated risks that others avoid. Advanced practitioners often discover that the weakness elimination process becomes self-reinforcing. Each dependency destroyed makes it easier to identify and eliminate others. Each fear confronted reduces the power of remaining fears. Each attachment released increases overall psychological freedom. The process accelerates as the practitioner develops what could be called systematic invulnerability. The social implications of systematic weakness elimination can be profound. Individuals who have eliminated their emotional dependencies often find that others attempt to create new dependencies through guilt, obligation, or social pressure. The recognition and resistance of these influence attempts becomes an ongoing aspect of maintaining inner strength. This does not mean becoming antisocial but, rather maintaining the ability to engage with others from a position of strength rather than need. The ultimate goal of this destructive process is not emptiness but, rather what classical philosophers called ataraxia, a state of unshakable tranquility that comes from having eliminated all external threats to inner peace. The individual who has systematically destroyed their weaknesses cannot be threatened, manipulated, or controlled through conventional means. They operate from a position of profound strategic advantage because they have eliminated the internal vulnerabilities that opponents typically exploit. This state of inner invincibility manifests in subtle but powerful ways. Decision-making becomes cleaner and more objective without emotional distortions. Negotiation becomes more effective without desperate underlying needs. Leadership becomes more authentic without dependency on followers' approval. Strategic thinking becomes more accurate without wishful thinking or fear-based distortions. The paradox of this destructive process is that it often leads to greater rather than lesser effectiveness in human relationships. Individuals who have eliminated their emotional dependencies can engage with others more honestly and generously because they are not seeking to extract validation or support. Their interactions become voluntary rather than needy, creating more authentic and durable connections. As this inner transformation completes itself, practitioners often discover that external circumstances that once seemed overwhelming become merely interesting challenges to be solved. Markets crash, relationships end, health declines, and political situations shift, but the individual who has eliminated internal vulnerabilities remains functionally unaffected. They adapt, learn, and continue pursuing their objectives regardless of external turbulence. The integration of all three principles, cold focus, silent action, and inner invincibility, creates what Machiavelli recognized as the foundation of lasting power: the individual who cannot be broken because there is nothing left to break, who acts with precision because emotion no longer clouds judgment, and who achieves objectives through invisible means because they have no ego needs requiring visible credit. This transformation typically takes years of systematic work, but each step forward compounds the advantages. The executive who develops cold focus makes better strategic decisions. The executive who masters silent action achieves objectives more efficiently. The executive who eliminates inner weaknesses becomes functionally indestructible. The combination creates an individual who shapes reality rather than being shaped by it. In our contemporary context, these principles become even more relevant as traditional sources of security, employment, institutions, social systems become increasingly unreliable. The individual who depends on external systems for security, validation, or direction becomes vulnerable to systemic disruption. The individual who has achieved genuine inner independence remains effective regardless of external chaos. The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others because there is nothing left in him that external forces can exploit. He has systematically eliminated every leverage point that opponents might use against him. He operates from a position of strategic invincibility not because he cannot be harmed but because harm cannot compromise his essential functioning. He has become, in the deepest sense, unconquerable. This is the ultimate expression of Machiavellian strategy, not merely the accumulation of external power but the achievement of inner invincibility that makes external power both more attainable and less necessary. The weak seek power to compensate for inner vulnerabilities. The strong achieve power as a natural expression of inner completeness. The difference between these approaches determines not just temporary success but lasting dominance in whatever arena they choose to enter. Those who master these principles discover that winning becomes less about defeating others and more about achieving objectives through superior preparation, execution, and positioning. Competition transforms from a struggle against opponents to a systematic development of advantages that make competition irrelevant. Victory becomes not a temporary achievement but a permanent condition maintained through continuous application of strategic principles that transform both the practitioner and the reality they inhabit.